Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Claude Shirati, and thank you very much for watching this show. We are obviously on African knowledge here at Africa Media Australia. And on Friday, as usual, we've got this African mindset discussion. And the topic tonight is on corruption and mediocrity versus excellence and progress in the African context. I bet there's a lot more to talk about this, and you find out more about that with my usual guest in just a moment. Thank you. We're talking today, as I said earlier, on corruption and mediocrity on the one hand, and excellence and progress on the other. We know that in the African continent, there are quite a lot of issues, even though Africa is not the only continent with issues. One of them is actually corruption. We know corruption happens everywhere. There's been enough Africa bashing. We're not going to be bashing Africa here, but at least we have issues in our continent that we ought to talk about and find ways of addressing them. And so we're gonna be talking about this topic with all my guests tonight. We've got Prosper Taravinga, an entrepreneur who is operating in digital marketing space. We've got Eugene Ullman, who's a documentary maker based in Sydney and who works in Africa, in many countries in Africa. He's a regular guest. And Florence Mawa in Melbourne. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. How are you tonight?
Excellent.
Good, good.
Okay. I think I hear a bit of is that an echo from me? Probably not. Can you guys hear an echo? No. Okay. Good. So we're talking about corruption, guys. I think that's a big issue in the African continent, isn't it?
I think it's a big issue in every continent.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, this show is about the African continent, so yes, but everybody always wants to talk about corruption in Africa and how corrupt Africa is, and I mean, I think rather than talk about is Africa more corrupt or less corrupt than everywhere else, it makes more sense to talk about what are the particular types of corruption that Africans encounter. I don't think trying to measure more or less, I don't think that works, because corruption, obviously, I mean, I'm in New South Wales, famous for its corruption. This is one of the things,
Exactly.
One of the biggest tourist attractions in Sydney is the corruption of the New South Wales government and the police force for decades. So,
That's right.
Let's not go there. But you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
it's a global problem, but maybe the African continent has its own flavor.
Well, I agree. New South Wales is a particularly interesting space for corruption because you just lost a premier recently in relation to that.
Exactly.
And yes, there are many angles that we can tackle this issue of corruption. And it's not just corruption. That's one thing. Corruption linked to mediocrity. We'll also talk about excellence and progress on the other hand, because the African story has many sides. And I think that applies for all other continents, as Eugene as mentioned. Florence, corruption is a big issue in the African continent, isn't it?
Yeah, and for me, I think I agree with Eugene in terms of his analysis that corruption is everywhere. And I think that is one of the things that people, as they migrate out of Africa and then encounter corruption in other spheres of the world, get a bit surprised, quite frankly, that it is everywhere. I think the challenge that Africa has is the perception of corruption, and the fact that a lot of people see Africa as this corrupt state. And if I look at Transparency International and that annual corruption index that they send out, there's only 3 countries in Africa who are over 50% in terms of, that they would perceive to be at least in the green when it comes to corruption. The rest are all in various shades of red and orange. So there's definitely a perception issue that Africa has around the world about the corruption in Africa, which is probably a little bit more nuanced than everyone else.
Okay. Prosper, what's your take on that?
For me, I believe we as Africans have always lived in a hierarchical society. So I think if you understand it from that standpoint, leaders will always be leaders, and those that are in the bottom standing will always be in the bottom standing, and people will do whatever they can in their power to maintain that status quo. So it depends on who is actually looking at it. Even though Zimbabwe has a CPI index of 24 out of 25, I mean, we're winning on that one, but it just depends on who's looking at who's taking score.
Okay. Now, I suppose we can look into what are some of the causes that of corruption in Africa, and I suppose it can be argued that it's the same everywhere, but there are particular situations and contexts that we ought to be able to discuss when it comes to the African continent. Because whilst we agree that there's corruption everywhere, many of our African countries tend to rate quite high on the corruption scale, so to speak, even though some of these publications that talk about corruption that Florence mentioned could be to some extent biased. But why is this problem a little bit bigger in Africa than other places?
Okay, I can take the lead on this one.
Go ahead.
So by the time I left Zimbabwe, I think our president had been the president for more than 30 years. And what that meant as a community and as a whole is that he had created a culture where CEOs and leaders in companies or in any other government parastatal were not leaving their positions of power. And whoever was in the bottom ranks had to make do with whatever little power and authority that they had, because they were never going to amount to anything. So that then created a culture that then backtracked to just about that trickled to just about everyone, up until the little kids in society can even ask for some sort of form of payment if you ask them to do a chore, or ask them to do anything, because it's now just inbred in them to ask for some sort of incentive for them to push a paper or to let you in on some sort of ranking order. So that culture was created by the leadership that was there at that particular time. And I feel like it's going to take maybe another generation to actually really clean out the pipes, because if 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds know that they need to be given something in order for them to be able to conduct any minuscule activity, then that really leaves a lot to be desired there.
Sure. All right, John Kohler has just joined us. John, we're talking about corruption and excellence. Corruption and then mediocrity versus excellence and progress in the African continent. And we've asked a question initially that corruption is quite a serious issue in the African continent. What's your take on that?
I think, corruption is really an endemic in Africa in terms of, governments or leaders not being accountable for the money that they collect in terms of maybe taxes and all that. It ends up in people's pockets, especially the leaders themselves. Line up the money into their pockets and development projects that they're supposed to be, carrying out, end up either not being started, or they're started and then they stall, because of corruption. So one of the things that I think is a cause is looking at resources that we have vis-a-vis, the way the resources are being exploited. So what happens is that once the resources are exploited, instead of these countries, African countries, adding value to them or even processing them before being sold overseas, is that they sell them straight away when they are still in raw form. And that means little money gets into the country, and that little money, instead of that money actually being used well, the leaders themselves even from the time when they are giving contracts for these companies to exploit. Corruption starts there because the way they allocate this, what do you call it? The
contract.
The legality to give somebody the legal, okay to continue or to be able to exploit some resources, you need to go through the government. So, and the ministry that is concerned, gives you an okay if you're a foreigner or somebody who has money in the country who can actually do that. So it starts from there where the minister has a cut, a certain amount that is given to him before, those legal transactions are done. So, so that money trickles down. By the time, the money ends up in the treasury, it's very little, and it can't actually serve the purpose it's supposed to serve by distributing it into the different departments of the government, for things, for development role, Okay. So that's one problem that I think is a main one. The other one actually is about ethnic divisions that we have in the country. In the African countries, we have so many tribes, or I don't like using the term tribes. I like using the term communities. And this is not wrong, but the issue has been that leaders exploit these divisions for their own good. So when it happens that, when they are dishing out the development money, certain communities get the money, others don't. Or no development is done in certain areas, while it's done in some areas where there's proper connection with the government, those who support the government or support a particular party. So, and that has been going on since independence. And so you find that in a country, for example, I'll give an example of where I come from, Kenya. There are certain parts of Kenya where, you can actually see that those parts have been left out for a long time. And it could be, if you look at the history of it, you realize that the people coming from that area have been in the opposition or something like that for a long time. So development will not go to that particular community because they don't have people in government who can vouch for them or who can, make the connection with the leaders and bring money that can develop the areas. So those are the two that I want to raise now. Thank you.
No problem. Now, let me ask a question. Is corruption in Africa necessarily political or fundamentally political?
Based on what I've said, I think it is political, but there are a myriad of reasons why corruption is endemic in Africa. One of them is political, and that's the main one because politics actually of a country determines a lot of things because the political leaders are the ones that distribute the resources or the funds that are collected in terms of tax or whatever from whatever areas that they collect into one pot and then they distribute to the country. So the politicians are the ones that sit there, plus government and ministers, to decide whether they need to do development in the country. That means it's politics that determines development. One of them, yeah.
All right. Yeah, I want to get your text, guys. On that, is corruption necessarily political or fundamentally political? Or is more to that?
No, I think that corruption, by definition, is political because it is a function of power relationships, which is politics. Mm-hmm. So I think in that sense, we can say that it is political. But I think very importantly, and I think there's three points that come to mind. I'll try and be very, very concise with them. The first one, I think, is that there's a political problem in a lot of African countries, which is the legal system has not been reformed since colonial times. In South Africa, it has. One of the things, my other home, South Africa, I consider it to be, definitely corruption is still a problem there, but they have actually sat down and said, we need to throw out the old system entirely, and we need to come up with a legal system that works for us. A lot of African countries are still using colonial legal systems. And what happens as a result is the majority of people don't have this feeling that this system, this legal system, is something that works for me. They don't feel like, oh, it's on my side. They're not invested in it working properly because they don't have a loyalty to it. And therefore the laws don't always make sense. They're not always practical for today's reality. And because people don't feel loyal to it, they find other loyalty. So it's like, okay, you and me, we're friends, we're family, we're from the same clan, we're from the same ethnic group. Let's you and me make an arrangement. We don't have to worry about what the rules are. We don't have to worry about, let's just make a plan between the two of us. So that's one form of corruption that happens when the loyalty that we find between you and me trumps our loyalty to the system working because we don't relate to it. The second issue is the issue of the fact that most countries don't have a robust system of social security and social protection. So because of that, it's easier to take advantage of people because you have a lot more desperate people. You know, there was a very interesting report. I don't know if anybody saw Sorius Samora, who's an amazing journalist from Sierra Leone. He did a report in Kenya where he went and moved into a shantytown and lived in a shantytown in Nairobi, and basically documented how he had to pay a bribe every second of his life to rent a shack, to have electricity put in, to do absolutely anything. He had to pay bribes. And because there's no social protection, again, the law is not on his side. You know, he's at the mercy of these people. And the third point is there's a cultural context, because in a lot of traditional contexts, for example, if I want to, when I want to film in a village, for example, if in Africa, as in my work, I want to film in a village or in a community or something, I might go and see an elder or a chief, and I might bring a gift, you know, to that person to show, you know, as part of, you know, but you know, if I was to bring a gift to a government official, that would not be appropriate. You know, or to a bank, for example. You know, if I was to come with a gift, you know, a bag of maize meal or something to a government official to extend my visa, that would not be appropriate. So I think there's a problem where, for a lot of African people, they're operating in a situation where to bring a gift to someone is appropriate in their cultural context, but all of a sudden the system they're dealing with, which is like a Western style government or a Western style system, suddenly that's not appropriate anymore. So there's that barrier that gets, you know, broken or kind of overlaps. So those are the three things that come to mind.
All right, Florence.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I think there's an element of transparency, right, around whether or not there's a transparency in the system that enables you to shed light on these practices. In a lot of these situations, and, you know, to your point, Eugene, it's a day-to-day thing. Like, everybody knows if you get stopped by the policeman at the robot, you know, you bring out the $5, etc. So it's not even a case of, you know, it's being done underground. It's become a part of the fabric of the society. And so how do you unwind that when people actually think that that's normal? And just I'm picking a little bit more of what you were saying in your third point, Eugene. I mean, even the concept of like conflict of interests, for example, is not there. You know, you giving someone, where does nepotism start at versus, you know, clansmanship and, you know, working with your alumni, right? So if I hire someone, is it okay? But, you know, if Donald Trump hires someone, it's different. So that's where the blurring of the lines becomes in terms of, at what point do you say it's not all right for you to hire your relatives and your friends, and it's not all right for you to get a gift from someone who's coming to do something? And in one context, is it okay? And I agree that from a legal perspective, because you don't have clarity around what that looks like, people can push those boundaries as much as they like.
Yeah.
All right. Prosper, we're talking about corruption in a political space, but it also happens even in business space. You know, when it comes to having contract with the government, for example, you know, it looks like in many countries you can't have it unless you bribe your way into it, and in fact officials would come even wanting to to solicit business people for contract and stuff like that. So where is that culture coming from? Is it just because of the, I suppose, low socioeconomic situation that many communities find themselves in, or is there more to it?
So naturally, as I alluded to earlier, and as what Eugene has also brought to light, that there's no social net that is, catching people as they fall. Every single day, when you are maybe a clerk or you are a manager at a business and you're seeing the money transacting in front of you, yet your kids at home have had 3 or 4 days of not a nourished meal or not a nutritious meal, or you haven't had fuel to come to work, you are bound to say, you know what, is there anything wrong with me also tapping into this, since I'm facilitating this transaction to happen? So that safety net, if it was there, then maybe if somebody touches that port or asks for corruption, you'd ask them, hey, excuse me, didn't you just collect a bag of maize yesterday? How can you say you're hungry? So now that's illegal. So there haven't been any measures within our community to actually put measures in place to stop people from wanting more when they can see it right in front of their face.
Okay. And how do we minimize corruption? Because I suppose it's difficult to eliminate it, because even much more advanced countries where people are not hungry, so to speak, they've got enough disposable income to take care of themselves very, very comfortably. There's still corruption, like in Australia or America or Europe. But how do we start? What do you start in trying to minimize corruption in the African continent or in the African context?
I think to start with, the idea that Western countries have had to build their structures and systems, both legal, political, for many years. We should also realize that most African countries have been independent, in the last maybe 50, 60 years. So we can actually really say that there's fair comparisons between these two disparities. So what I would want us to look at is to see the progress that has been made, since independence up to now, or if there's no progress at all in terms of strengthening those structures, government structures, political structures, to enable some of these ills that we are talking about, one of them being corruption, being reduced. So if I give you an example of Kenya, when we achieved independence in 1963, up to 2010, we were using the old constitution, as we've talked about the legal system and all that, which was really very problematic because it was not serving us well. And there was a lot of people actually were hungering for changes in the constitution, but the people who are benefiting on it, like the leaders, because it was sort of favoring a certain class of people. So they didn't want any changes. So it was, in fact, some people had to be jailed, others had to even lose their lives because of trying to bring these changes in the country. But in 2010, we managed to get, the new constitution that came in, which is a very good one, actually, one of the progressive constitutions that we have in Africa. But unfortunately, the issue is you can have the best laws, but if they are not, there's no one to make them effective, or there's no willingness within the government, or the systems of government to make these laws happen, there will just be laws there and things will just continue as normal. So we have regressed. Since 2010, Kenya was actually talked of as being one of the most progressive nations in Africa, and people are very happy about the new constitution. But down the line, from 2010 to now, it's like we've gone back, because what has happened is that the members of parliament have gone in there and made some changes, slowly by slowly, changing those laws that really were going to serve the country well, to sort of become very weak. So, and that is why I was saying that the progress can be made, but there can also be some regression as well, because there are people who don't want change, because change will mean that they will lose certain things that they were benefiting before.
Okay. Yeah. Eugene,
I think if if you make the institutions strong, like if the constitutional court, for example, like in South Africa, the constitutional court has more power than the government. So, for example, in the famous case of South African president, Jacob Zuma, who was removed from power, and that was kind of like shown in the media as like, look, this is South Africa is corrupt, and the corruption at the top level of government in the presidency and so on. But to me, this was a great success story of South Africa because yes, the president was corrupt, yes, and the people around him, but the system was strong enough to remove him. The legal system was stronger than the government, and he was removed. And not only that, but when he tried to put pressure on the media when he was in power, every single time he failed because the media laws are strong enough that the government cannot put pressure on the media or silence the media. So you will never be rid of corruption, but what you need to do is you need to build these institutions of like a strong court system that is more powerful than the government, a strong media which is protected by law, those things, so that you can actually expose that corruption and you can actually fight against it when it happens, even though you can't eliminate it. So I think that's very important. And the other thing is, I think that the laws should actually accept the traditional things. Like the law should not deny that, I might have to bring a chicken as a gift in a certain situation. Like the law should actually talk about, when this is appropriate and when this isn't, because it has to accept the cultural reality of the people on the ground.
Okay, so changing the laws, having strong laws, that's very important. Prosper?
I think empowerment, because if African people actually realized how powerful they actually are, they own the means of production. All the raw materials that were mentioned there by my brother there, if they knew that what can be done and how they can be produced in order to add value, like what was mentioned there, I don't think we as a people would even need to rely on paying our way through if we know that we hold much more power with what we hold, because all the diamonds, all the coffee, all the gold is mined by these bare hands. And if we actually just take a stronghold of that and not and not release it to somebody else who's going to make us beg for us to get it back in some form or another. I think empowerment really needs to be at a grassroots level, and people have to realize that, yes, you could be an elephant in a circus, but if you turn around, everybody there is dust, Yeah.
Sure.
I'm going to reference, I read an article, and it was some research that had been done by Norton Rose just around countries that had actually tried to implement corruption reversal strategies, if you like, in the country. And they were sort of tracking which ones were successful and which ones weren't. And they talked about a 3-prong approach around prevention. So actually doing a massive drive around prevention, prosecution, which I think is this legal element that people are talking about, that if you are caught, you have the instruments in place to catch people. And if you're caught, people can actually see an action come out of it. And then education. And with the education piece, it was very much about ensuring that you are putting it up in the limelight, that you're getting that human agency aspect of having, committed individuals and companies that are speaking up very loudly about supporting this, and actually shining the light on people who are doing what you want from a behavioral perspective. And so all of that, I think, would sort of get you in the right direction. A lot of countries talk about, and African countries talk about, the fact that they want to stop corruption. But then the question then becomes, where's that coordinated effort and the implementation strategy around what does that mean aside from the speeches, right? Like where are the KPIs? What are you trying to reduce? Where are the numbers that you're actually speaking to? What is the criteria that you're using as a reduction of corruption? So all of that next level of granular detail seems to be what's missing from the narrative around we want to stop corruption.
Okay, now we've talked enough about corruption. On the other side, I would put excellence, which is what is needed to try to push the continent forward, the countries and communities forward. There is, I suppose, when you look at what is happening in the discourse, in the narrative, people are starting to talk a lot about excellence in terms of work achievement and a culture of work and ethical behaviors and sort of pursuing a vision and goal. What's your reading on how that is happening in Africa? What should be done to, I suppose, encourage that more as a way to minimize or, if not eliminate, corruption at all levels, with political, business, education, and everything else?
I'm going to start off by being controversial on this one. I don't actually see that as the sphere, right, in terms of the opposite of corruption being the excellence, because I think if we go back to the start of this conversation, there are a lot of countries that I consider are actually, doing really excellent things and are being quite prosperous, but they still have levels of corruption, and in some cases, quite significant corruption. I think there's a driver in terms of wanting to reduce corruption, but I don't think that by increasing excellence, you necessarily reduce corruption, if that makes sense. I don't think there's necessarily a clear correlation there.
Don't you think, at least on the leadership level, if we have leaders who are focused on excellence leadership, that ultimately that will drive them a little bit away from corruption?
Okay, I see where you're coming from. So more in terms of the behavior of the people who are doing the leading, as opposed to the country and its prosperity.
That's right. So it's more on the leadership level at all levels. Yes, Prosper?
I believe leadership in what we have now is leadership. It needs 50 years to be cleaned full circle in order for it to actually start functioning in a acceptable manner. All right. But I know that everything has a price. So, if somebody offers you $1,000 for that microphone, I bet you'd be like, hey, where do I ship it to? You know what I mean? So
well, I'm only 500. If I can pay, if they can give me 1,000, that's 500 that I can pocket.
You see, like I said, everything has a price. So no matter where we go, no matter what we try and do, no matter what level society becomes, even like we've just noticed recently, our sister state, you wouldn't expect that to be happening at that level. You know what I mean? So, and anything that has been bought can still be bought. I just feel like if you give people the means of production, have them understand that the bag of coffee that you're putting to the marketplace could actually be 3 times worth more if you would just maybe polish the beans a little bit finer. You know what I mean? And then sell them later on instead of wanting money yesterday. So I think it has to start at a grassroots level. Leadership, let them have their coffees and their whiskeys at conference hotels saying they're talking about corruption while the people are organizing themselves from a grassroots level.
Okay.
I think if you
wanted to say something. Just one thing, please.
No, please go ahead.
Yeah, it's about when you talk about leadership, that we have, the quality of leadership that we have in most African countries. There's a guy called I think his name is Mohammed or some. Usually shortens his name to Mo. He lives in the UK, but he's a great entrepreneur. He's done
Egyptian,
good for himself. And he has put aside some money, which I don't know, it was 5 billion or something, for any African president who manages to do well politically and lift these people's economic situation for the time duration that person has been the president. When they retire, he gives them a certain amount of money. And I think Botswana, president of Botswana, who retired a while ago, received that money, I think. I can't remember any other president that was given that money, but it's been so.
Mauritius always does very well in the Mo Ibrahim ratings.
Yeah. So that's what I just wanted to bring up, that idea of excellence. If you have people who can support such kind of thing, where you give some incentive for being a good leader, that could be a good starting point.
How's that not a bribe, though? It's like if you're not corrupt, we're going to give you this great big bribe. So
But look, it's not. I don't see it as
now, and we'll give you the money later.
It's just like Nobel Prize, for example.
No,
People
no,
are getting
I
Nobel Prize for
understand.
doing
It's
things.
just funny, you know. It's like
I think for me,
thing.
I can sort of see where Eugene's coming with that, because it's almost rewarding someone for doing what they should have always done in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, I would say I think it plays a role. It's not just about rewarding what they should have done, but if they've done it so well to the point that they serve as a model for others around them or others in the future, then rewarding them is actually a very good thing, because that's one way to, I suppose, get people to pay attention to the need of doing an excellent job as a leader, because it all comes down to leadership.
Yeah, and look, my brother was said, it's like bribing them. I do agree. If the situation was really good in Africa in terms of the political situation and leadership and all that, then there would be no need to bribe these guys or give them that. But when you find a situation is so dire and there's nothing else that seems to work, sometimes such things can actually spur up some kind of change.
Okay,
I agree.
And I want to introduce something. Sorry, Eugene, you wanted to say something?
No, I was just agreeing. I think
Yeah, the situation is so dire. We agree that in many countries, at least giving people an opportunity to tell them that you don't have to stay in power for forever. You can leave power, let other new blood come into the leadership, and we'll give you some money to live on. It could be a good incentive. You can see that as a bribe in some sort. But anyway, I suppose something has to be done. But let me also bring in the diaspora aspect to it. We see a lot of times where the diaspora, individuals, African individuals in the diaspora, talk about corruption in the country and everything. But then when they go back, they actually end up being corrupted, and probably even more corrupted. They do the same, and then what they've seen there. Why is that? Why can't they show some difference? And I understand it's not the case for everyone, but in majority of the cases, people who were living in the diaspora who denounce corruption, when they go back and be given some responsibility, they behave just like everyone else, and they become corrupt.
Absolutely. I've got a good one for you there, Mr. Sharadi. Have you ever heard of what's called black tax? So naturally, when somebody elevates, all right, and he's now in a position of power, that person has to send the elevator down, and that elevator doesn't go down empty. So you might as well just bring whoever is going to be filling up in that elevator so that they don't have to worry you. And we also have a case in point where in Zimbabwe we've had somebody waiting for over 30 years to become the president. Now, can you imagine every single year that they're waiting, they're just looking at loopholes and things that they will be doing. By the time they get into the position, they're going to be trying to fit into all those little spaces that they were looking at for the last 30 years, and then do it for their family as well. And that takes 3 or 4 or 5 years, and that's already in time for their first term, and then by the time they want to go into their second term, they now start sending money down just to bring in their relatives to say, hey, look what I did for you, come and vote for me. So that's just how it works. And back to the story that was spoken about earlier, that we've got little communities that we thrive in and amongst. So if I want things done really quick, I'm going to speak to people that speak my language first, and if they understand me, we go. By the time the other people that speak a different dialect catch up, they're already out of the equation. So there's just so much of that dynamic that's happening. So, and if somebody comes from the diaspora, he's gonna need advisors, and where these advisors sitting around already in that contaminated cesspool of corruption. So what other advice are they gonna give him?
Okay,
I just want to mention a quick thing, if I can. Oh, sorry, can I say?
That's all right. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I just want to, just on that point, I wanted to give. I don't know if anybody's been following the story of Akon City.
Yes.
Yeah. So here we have this expat African diaspora African person who's a huge celebrity, has access to millions of dollars, and says, I want to invest in my country, I want to make my country great. So what does he do? He comes up with this completely insane copy of Dubai, like a total lunatic concept, American engineering company contracted to do it, to build it, Emirati company contracted to design it, right? Because he's a celebrity, the president of Senegal comes running and, you know, wants to be photographed with him and says, let's do this. I'm going to give you land. I'm going to give you whatever you want. Meanwhile, there is excellence in Africa. There is excellence in Senegal. There are people who understand how to build cities and how to do things.
Yes.
But what are the local populations going to be shining shoes and serving drinks to these expats coming to build this crazy thing? But because he's a celebrity and because he's a famous person, he can do whatever he wants. So this is a perfect example of corruption practiced by a diaspora African who's creating this image of I'm trying to help my country, right? And B, this is an amazing example of settler colonialism. And I'm just waiting to see where this is going to go. But I think this ties into the conversation because, you know, the excellence that's in Africa is not being given a chance. And the illusion of excellence is being created by somebody just because he's a celebrity.
Oh, we got pretty much 3 minutes to go. I just want to get a last word from you. In 3 words, what would you want to say that you think Africa needs to do to minimize corruption and increase excellence in leadership that may create progress in countries and communities? Just 1 or 2, you can go up to 3 things, but very quickly, in less than a minute, 30 seconds for each before we finish. Florence, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about mindsets. It's about the heart aspect of getting people to have that pride in not going down that path. But then it's also about the infrastructure and education to enable them to do that if that's where their hearts are at. If they don't have the money and that's the only way they can get out, they're going to take that route.
Okay, Prosper.
Absolutely. Infrastructure and education to empower the African people to realize that every piece or ounce of cobalt that they are mining is powering a mobile phone somewhere else where they don't even have a phone to call a doctor when they're in hospital. So when they need to go to hospital. So they should know that their work is actually much more valuable than what they're getting in return.
And, John, quickly.
Okay, so I just wanted to say as well that corruption is actually multifaceted, and it requires a lot of effort in terms of legal system being strengthened, and also transforming our education systems in Africa, so that the research that is being done in Africa, so it's being used, to help the country instead of leaving them to, because a lot of research that is being done is kept in in cupboards to gather dust in most of the universities. Governments never use them, so we need these governments to be able to use this knowledge that is being created by Africans themselves. And then another issue is transforming as well bringing in the gender equality, which is a big thing in Africa, because that's a big thing in Africa where equality is not there. Among the genders, you find that the female gender really still lags behind and needs a lot of support in order to make them successful like any other country in the West. So we need both genders to have equality. That's what I'm talking about.
Yes, Prosper, for finish. Actually, Proper has done it. I'm talking about Eugene.
So,
sorry.
Strong media, media protection, institutions that protect media so that the media can expose these things without fear of repercussions, and a very strong framework of social protection and fair pay for people. If a policeman wasn't being underpaid, he or she wouldn't have to stand at a roadblock and collect $5, from drivers.
Okay. Well, that's a very nice way of ending it. The media must play its role to basically uncover all these illegal deals and all the behaviors of the leaders and everybody involved in corruption. It's obviously, as has been said here, a multifaceted issue that requires a lot of things to be able to be addressed. And we need to be able to talk about this. We need to be able to empower our people. We need to be able to do what we can to educate people so that they can do better. And our leaders, because if the people put a lot of pressure on the leaders, they may actually be forced to avoid or to minimize corruption. Because a lot of the times, many of our African leaders just have this feeling that they can do pretty much anything they like, and that doesn't help our countries. All right, that's all we've got time for tonight. It's we'll hope to be able to get more time to discuss this topic in greater length, perhaps in the future. I want to thank you all of you, Prosper Taravinga, Florence Mawa, Eugene Oman, and John Cole. Thank you for your time to African Knowledge, and we hope to see you again next Friday for more on the African Mindset series.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right. For those watching, we have a networking session straight after this. You may have received the Zoom link. You can just click on that, and we will be going to the Zoom for the networking session. Thank you very much. And until next time, stay blessed and stay safe. Thank you. Okay. All right. We can swap to Zoom if you like. If you're staying, that will be good. Go to Zoom.
Well, do we have a Zoom? Where's the Zoom link?
I send it by email.
Oh, you
just check
you send that email? Okay, let me check.
Oh, okay.
Email. Sure, I send it by email.